one of the things that were interesting is that they discovered the book of Jesus' wife, which is at the Harvard Seminary, which, according to some scholars, that's a little controversial, but they claim that this is an accurate record that Jesus may have even been married.
Hi guys, welcome to the Church Split. And before we get into the main part of this video, I just wanted to tell you, if you're part of my normal audience, that this is a different video than normal, because this video is actually me responding to Billy Carson in One Life Network studio. What is that, you ask? Well, One Life Network is actually a network I have recently joined at the church of which I work at that actually is working to change the worldview of the next generation. And this is going to include not only One Life Network, the channel with Brett Nicholson and Chris Shadowin, but also is going to include Braxton Hunter with Trinity Radio and, of course, myself with the Church Split. So I hope you guys enjoy this video, but you guys can go ahead and follow both Trinity Radio and One Life Network for more, and you're probably going to see a bit more collaboration between channels and videos like this in the future. So I hope you guys enjoy.
Hi guys, if you've been living under a rock lately, you might know that Billy Carson with Forbidden Knowledge actually debated Dr. Wes Huff, who is a biblical scholar and historian, to put his claims to the test. So let's jump into it, shall we?
And if you listen to the podcast, the statement is according to the Sinai Bible. Okay, according to the Sinai Bible, Jesus wasn't crucified in that Bible. And that Bible predates the King James Version of the Bible.
I have a few things to say about this right off the gate when I first listened to this. So what's fascinating to me, first off, he references a Sinai Bible. Now, Wes does actually call him out on this, but there's no such thing as a Sinai Bible. There's Codex Sinaiticus, which we're going to talk about shortly, but he seems to be referencing some sort of, I don't know, title from an Amazon link or something. I don't know. But then he makes reference to the King James Bible, that it predates the King James Bible, which, by the way, shouldn't surprise anyone since the original King James Bible was published in 1611. There was actually plenty of Bibles before the KJV, so I don't know why that suddenly become the standard by which to measure, because there's the Bishop's Bible, the Geneva Bible before the King James. There's all sorts of the Latin Vulgate. So I don't know exactly what he's trying to get to here. And now if he's bringing up different codexes like ancient manuscripts, we know that we have thousands of those and various different papyri. But regardless, I just wanted to make sure we clarify that, because he claims to be a leading expert actually in this field. And the more and more he speaks, even in his own debate, you will soon find that that doesn't seem to follow.
And the text there actually is about 12 to 14,000 differences between the Sinai Bible and the King James Version of the Bible, which came much later.
Again, I don't mean to keep interrupting here, but when you talk about these differences, people do this all the time when they're referencing biblical texts. They're saying, well, there's tens of thousands of differences between this and that text, so therefore they can't be trusted. But what they don't tell you is the manner of which those errors are. Are they totally different details? Like, is Jesus not really Jesus? Was he not really crucified? Did not really die in one manuscript versus the other? No, that's actually not what we see. What we see are differences like in punctuation, essentially, or slightly different misspellings between them. If you have 10,000 different papers where everyone has written different accounts of the same event, but they tried to do it word for word, you're going to find differences among those, but they're mostly going to be exactly what we find: punctuation and spelling differences. So that's all that is. So the 14,000 differences between these different things that he's talking about actually don't follow. That's not actually just basically overinflating some piece of data, but the specifics is actually what matters and what those differences are.
And then also, one of the things that were interesting is that they discovered the book of Jesus' wife, which is at the Harvard Seminary, which, according to some scholars, is a little controversial, but they claim that this is an accurate record that Jesus may have even been married, which then, adds more, if that's true, it adds more to the hypothesis that maybe he wasn't crucified.
Now, I'm not going to talk about the Jesus's wife situation as much right now, because that's a whole nother topic. But bottom line is actually historians, it's not this big conflict by historians. They actually don't affirm that. However, when he is talking about here, he says that, well, go into more evidence that Jesus wasn't crucified. That is a very audacious statement, because it is actually what we call a bedrock fact in history. So what that means is that you can have atheists, theists, Christians, non-Christians alike, all historians of all sorts of different beliefs and practices, all agree that Jesus was a real person and that he was crucified. So to deny that actually means that you're denying just what we call a bedrock fact. So we have now left historical discussions and into the realm of fantasy.
I I just personally believe that Jesus was an amazing human being. I don't think that he was the Son of God in the sense that he's God, but that we're all gods. As he said, ye are gods, and that we're to do greater things in him. And I just personally believe that the return of the Christ is the return of the Christ consciousness. When we can all achieve a certain level of knowledge, wisdom, passion, understanding, empathy, love that he came to this planet with, and we get that in our mind and our conscience, and we can act on those incredible emotions and that understanding, that the whole world is going to transform instantaneously. And I think at the second coming is the coming of the Christ consciousness to the planet, not a human being flying back to Earth to save people. That's just.
Now, I wanted to also touch on this real fast with what Carson is saying here. Again, we have left actual like historical discussions and now into the realm of fantasy. Jesus claimed to be the Son of God. You can't sit there and say that Jesus was this great and incredible person, taught amazing things, and then turn around and say that all his claims, though, about who he was himself were completely ridiculous. It's either, this is where you get into the trilemma that C.S. Lewis has talked about. Was he a madman? Was he actually immoral and lying, or was he telling the truth, right? So that's, Carson has to deal with some of these objections, but he doesn't. And you'll notice in a lot of his episodes and a lot of his discussions, he just kind of asserts stuff and grants himself things without actually substantiating them. This is a consistent thing, and wait for it, because Wes calls it out.
You seem to have investigated to a certain degree some of these facts. Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
When you say the Sinai Bible, what are you referring to specifically?
It's the biblical text that was written. It made it into you can actually look it up on Amazon. It's a Bible called, I have a version at home. It's called the Sinai Bible, right, from Mount Sinai. I'm assuming that's the mountain that they're referencing there. But they put together their own version of the biblical text prior to the King James Version being put out.
Sure. So when you refer to the Sinai Bible, would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus, like the codex that comes? Okay. That's why I was trying to get some clarification, because so you can actually go and see Codex Sinaiticus is at the British Library. So you can go and see it. It's on display. And the British Library has actually digitized the entire manuscript. So I work with manuscripts in my linguistic work. I'm an expert on early Christian scribal culture, and particularly in Greek and Coptic manuscripts. I actually have a facsimile. So I have a photocopy that was done by the British Library of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office. So I have it here. And the only reason I asked for clarification is because I want to make sure that what I'm addressing is actually what you mean.
Gotcha.
And not addressing something else. Because the Codex Sinaiticus in particular is just it's a 4th century Greek manuscript. Mm-hmm. It comes from approximately between 325 and 350 AD. And its text of the Gospels reads almost identical to the modern Greek text that we develop translations from. So my curiosity is just simply in kind of exploring, when you say that it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there, I mean, I can go on right now, Codex Sinaiticus, and I can look up the end of, say, Matthew 27, mm-hmm. where it has Jesus being crucified. And that's in Codex Sinaiticus, or, the John 19, or any of the other ones. So I think my confusion is that it doesn't read any differently.
Okay, so we have Wes here actually explaining precisely what Codex Sinaiticus is. In fact, if you know anything about the history of Codex Sinaiticus, it was actually a huge find when it came to our biblical manuscript history. It was one of the ways that we were actually able to develop a critical text where we understood what the New Testament meant and what it said. So it's like the earliest manuscript that we have. It is actually a very powerful manuscript for that reason. And within it, it actually does, yes, contain the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So Billy Carson, who claims, again, to be a foremost expert in this field, is wrong and actually apparently clueless on what these things actually contain. So we're going to go ahead and move on. So guys, what is going to happen next is that we're going to get to the part of the debate where Wes is actually struggling with technologically, like there's some sort of technical issues happening. And Billy Carson kind of goes on a little rant here. And I actually wanted to respond in Wes's place because Wes is only able to partially respond to this. I wanted to actually respond in kind here. But you'll notice also, if you go back and watch the debate, highly encourage you to do so. Wes actually absolutely dismantles Billy Carson's claims. And not only does he do that, he does so with so much grace and kindness, which is what actually makes it kind of crazy that Billy now is threatening legal action against Wes, and we'll talk about that quickly at the end. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it.
Point that I'm making here, I got to say something before I get out of here, is the Bible is full of contradictions. The biggest problem that we have is we're dealing with a civilization on this planet that is psychologically impaired. Human beings are psychologically impaired. This entire planet. We're living on an insane asylum. Earth is an absolute insane asylum. Mental illness has spread throughout the planet Earth like a complete virus. And when you take a text like the biblical text, knowing that human beings globally are mentally ill, this entire planet is a mental insane asylum. And I'm talking everyone. All 8 billion, whatever number of people we have now, are all mentally ill. And what I mean is there's different levels of mentally ill. We all have trauma that we're not dealing with. We all have internal issues. We all have situations that shadow work that needs to be done. And some people are at higher levels of mental illness than others. Most of us are functional mental illness people. But when you take a look at the biblical text and you start going through this information, and it's the way that it's laid out, it becomes a proponent of more divide and conquer tactics. It becomes a proponent of racism. It becomes a proponent of slavery. It becomes a proponent of all these things that are dark and ill, including murder and killing in the name of God, which has been done how many millions of times?
Okay, so real quick, he first asserts that there's a lot of contradictions in the Bible. Now, you'll notice he doesn't, of course, demonstrate any of those because every time he's brought forth evidence in this debate, Wes has succinctly dismantled it. So it's one thing to just make claims, it's another thing to prove them. And then he goes on to talk about mental illness and how we all have mental illness. And I guess that must be what his excuse is for threatening lawsuits against Wes Huff after losing in this debate. It must be his mental illness speaking. But anyway, with all that, we can really get into where now he starts making these claims of like, well, the Bible is actually at the root of all this violence, of racism. Ironically, it's actually Christians who are the only ones ever throughout history continually pushing against slavery. Yet he claims it's actually the Bible that created slavery or is one of those proponents that push slavery. Now, it's true that there's the slave Bible. We all know about that, but everyone knows that that was also a hijacking. Back then, they knew it was a hijacking of the Bible, and people used the non-slave Bible, by the way, to push against those teachings. So this is where it gets really fascinating to me, where he just starts propagandizing as opposed to trying to bring actual evidence, because once you're position is completely falling apart and your ego is involved, and instead of going, thank you for correcting me, I am now one step closer to truth, you have to hold your position. So you just start creating rhetoric. This is what you start seeing here, because you'll notice it shifted from the Bible has contradictions to the Bible now is the problem of all and is the root of all these horrible things, even though history would actually disagree with him. It's actually history that if the Bible is actually where we first see in the Middle East, especially women getting proper rights ever in the Torah. We see that also Christians are the ones who started pushing towards equal rights amongst other people. And by the way, we still see that to this day. So Billy Carson, you are incorrect on this. But let's now listen to what he finally wraps us up with.
So my thing about the biblical text is it actually authored by the creator of the universe, or is it authored by the dark forces of, maybe if this Satan is real, Satan himself? And the reason why I say that is because all-knowing, all-loving God, omnipotent and omniscient, that is creating not only this universe, probably most likely multiple universes, because a creator never stops creating, especially with infinite power.
Who says a creator never stops creating? That just seems to be a claim without any sufficient evidence whatsoever. But anyway.
Is now at some point going to author a text that is going to allow human beings to misinterpret it and take it in his name and begin to slay people, torture people, and enslave people worldwide, to claim that you're chosen ones, to set up a state of chosen people and then to even claim that you have chosen land and to torture and kill even more people, women and children in modern times, still going on to this very day, to me, that doesn't seem like a very intelligent being, especially a being that knows the beginning and the end. So if you know the beginning and the end, you have a certain level of foreknowledge. You have advanced knowledge that goes beyond. You know what's the ending before the end even occurs. So you set up everything for success. Why? Because a genius solves problems before they happen. And I'm going to drop the mic on that.
And then he walks out of the studio. So you notice he doesn't give Wes time to respond to this. He doesn't care that Wes is even having technical issues like a lot of people do when they're having these online discussions where they actually open the floor, let them have a conversation. Hey, man, let's make sure you're good and stable and continue the conversation. Billy seems to be completely uninterested in honest dialogue at this point. He wants to continue to propagandize. Now, when we talk about propagandizing, notice how he starts talking about, well, how could a perfect being create the Bible? How do we know it's not Satan if Satan is real? Well, first off, the Bible paints Satan as the bad guy and God as the good guy. So first off, that seems like a bad plan. The other issue with that is the fact that he starts pulling in that just because God knows something, by the way, doesn't mean that he's the cause of it. God knowing that people might twist his word doesn't suddenly mean that he's responsible for it. It could be in such a world that he wants people to make free choices with their own free will, and that they will be held responsible for how they use that free will and how they use their free thinking in order to interact with the material in front of them. It could so happen that God actually doesn't want to solve all our problems, but in fact wants us to turn to him and work alongside him in solving problems, because that is what we call building character. That is what we call soul building. That is a theodicy that has been used since the very beginning of time in theology. So anyhow, with all that said, that is what has happened in the Billy Carson and Wes Huff debate. There is so much more you could get into. And yes, Billy Carson is actually threatening lawsuits. He actually did everything he could to prevent this debate from becoming public, which is, of course, ironic from a guy whose entire platform is called Forbidden Knowledge. But Wes has accepted the terms of his cease and desist letter, essentially, so long as Billy Carson agrees to sit down and have another debate and discussion with him. Will Billy accept? I don't think the chances are very high. But hey, we will see. And if you guys like this, you guys want to check out more, you can actually check out my personal channel where I talk about more historical proofs of Christianity right here. Talk to you soon.